Welcome to Thursday Book Club. I'm coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respect to elders past and present and First Nation readers and writers with us tonight. For anyone new, my name's Suzanne Leal. I'm the author of 6 novels, most recently The Watchful Wife and The Year We Escaped. Uh, I was just chatting to my guest Midge about why Thursday Book Club came to be. And as many of you know, it was a COVID thing. So COVID started, my book, The Deceptions, was out. No shops were open. No one was buying anything. The online fervor for books hadn't yet started because we were all too shocked. So I thought, well, I better go online. And we started Thursday Book Club, and the idea was to connect readers online. And to my surprise, to my delight, 5 years later, here we are. So it's been a relaxed book club where people come as they can. You read what you like and you recommend what you like to us. Every month or so, we have a guest author, and that makes it exciting for all of us. So if you'd like to join up, you just sign on to my Substack, and the details are on my website, which is suzanneleal.com. But now to the main game. Tonight or this morning, depending on what hemisphere you're in, I'm delighted to be in conversation with Midge Gillies, whose latest work is Atlantic Furies, which is this one here, The Women Who Risked Everything to be the First to Fly. Welcome to you, Midge.
Thank you. Honestly, I'm so excited to be here. I've never been to Australia, and it's 9 in the morning, and it blows my mind that it's a completely different time for you, and you're the other side of the world to me. So it's amazing. So thank you so much for inviting me, Suzanne.
What we also often find from some of your compatriots is they can't get in their head that we're actually in advance here.
I know, and it's because my book has been published in Australia. It's very odd to wake up in the morning and instantly get an email from my publicist because normally you kind of wait a whole day and there it is waiting for me. So, and I spoke to a student once, and she was in a different. It was a leap year, and she was in a different month from me, and that I just couldn't cope with that at all. So, yes, it's a lot to get your head around, really, isn't it?
In fact, I had a friend whose friend was living overseas and they had babies at the same time, but on different days.
Oh,
That's very
now that's gonna worry me all day. Now I'm gonna pop over.
complex. Let's move on. Let's talk about you then rather than times. I'm looking forward to talking about the book, but what I wanted to do first of all is just get a little bit about you. Many of us will know of you, but not many of us will have met you before. So, you're an acclaimed author and historian, and Cambridge University really seems to have been your stomping ground for a long time. How did you first come to Cambridge?
So I grew up in East Anglia, and I was lucky enough to get a place to read history at Cambridge, which I still find incredible, and I'm not sure I would get in now if I applied. Um, and I found Cambridge an odd place. It's full of kind of rules that they only tell you once you've left and that kind of thing, but it is a beautiful place. And I left and became a journalist and started writing books in London. And I always thought it was very sad, people who went back to Cambridge. But here I am back in Cambridgeshire and I teach in Cambridge. Um, so it's a very kind of flat, dank place a lot of the time, but it has got some beautiful buildings as well.
Must say, I went there actually for the first time as an adult earlier this year where we met.
Yeah.
And for us here in Australia, it really is quite special. I mean, it really
Mhm.
is quite idyllic, particularly when you go in summer and the sun is shining and
Yeah, yeah,
the boats.
yeah.
Yeah.
The punts, yes. And when I was an undergraduate, so I went to a college called Girton, which was a little way out of the centre because it was originally an all women's college, and they wanted to make sure we didn't get up to anything naughty. And so it was like being in a washing machine. So I would cycle into town, get soaked, dry off, and then get soaked again, and then dry off on the way home. So that's it at its worst. But it is a stunning place when the sun shines. Yeah.
And when you say you've come back, in what capacity have you come back? Tell me what your role is at the moment and what it has been over the years.
Yeah, so I teach creative writing. So if any of you are interested in studying creative writing, I teach at the university. We have lots of online courses, and we do have Australian students. And we also have a master's in creative writing, which is part-time. So you would have to come over to Cambridge. And now I realise I should have said it was a much more wonderful place than I did. But yeah, so I do that. And I love teaching people creative writing because, Suzanne, as you know, being a writer can be quite a lonely business, and it's really good to be able to talk to other people about books.
Excellent, excellent. And what sort of students do you get to teach creative writing to who are in person? Are they younger? Are they coming back for more? How does it work?
So a whole range of people, and my kind of favourite class would be, and we do get very diverse classes. So people from around the world, someone who's maybe been out of university for a couple of years, and I think our oldest student was well into their 70s. This is on the master's programme. We have older students than that in other courses. And I find that those people get on really well, and they have so many shared
Yes.
experiences that they can talk about. And that's a delight. I love those kind of discussions and, excuse me, surprising friendships that strike up when people are forced to discuss literature and share their own writing.
And I also think too that writing is one of those careers which may not make you a millionaire, but it doesn't have a cutoff point. There's no age cutoff point. In fact, the more you live, the more there is to write.
Yes, yes, and sometimes, because I mainly teach creative nonfiction and memoir, and also teach memoir online for Granta. And sometimes we have quite young students, and I do think maybe you should wait a while before you write about your own life. But then sometimes they want to write about relatives or an issue, and that's really exciting as well. And yes, I mean, when I have to see my financial advisor, to talk about things like pensions and that kind of stuff, he says, "So when do you think you'll retire?" And God willing, I hope I'll carry on writing as long as I enjoy it. And I'm absolutely loving it now, probably more than when I started out, but I still have imposter syndrome. So I still kind of probably worry more about my writing than I did when I was young and just starting out.
So if you, on one hand, worry about it more, but you enjoy it more, how does that work, do you think?
Yeah, well, I suppose I kind of worry us in that horrible period when there's nothing you can do about a manuscript and you're waiting for it to come out. You think, oh my goodness, what mistakes are in there, all those kinds of things. But then when it comes out, hopefully it's all right. I do love talking about it and sharing the stories I've come across. And I suppose when I first started writing, I didn't like so much that aspect of it because, I'm naturally quite a shy person and I would have been really shy in my 20s or 30s. So the thought of kind of talking to people about something I'd written would just give me the heebie-jeebies. But now I'm a tiny bit more relaxed about it.
So on my count, you've published 9 books of nonfiction. Have I got that right?
I think it's a few more than that, but who's counting
No,
really?
no, no.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I suspect that your financial advisor would like you to be counting for starters. But many books of nonfiction, a variety of topics, which include the Second World War and Piccadilly Circus in London, biographies and life writing. The book that caught my eye immediately was The Barbed Wire University, which is a story of prisoners of war during the Second World War. How did that come to you?
Yeah, so actually my dad was a prisoner of war. So he was Scottish and he was captured in Italy and held for just over a year. But he didn't really talk very much about it, although he was a very naturally a great storyteller. And every Christmas we would watch The Great Escape, and he would love it. But I got the impression there was no relationship between what he'd experienced and this view of what it was like to be a POW. And then, do you remember the Iraq War? And there was some Air Force people who were captured, and it really had an effect on my dad. And so it made me think about, so what is the true story? Because we think of POWs as being escapers and things like that. And an editor came up to me and said, "Would you write a book about what it's really was like to be a POW, and particularly the creativity?" Um, and I said, "Yeah, that's great," because I didn't have enough to write about my dad. And I had such a great time. And I interviewed actually lots of men who'd served on what was known as the Death Railway. and interviewed an amazing guy. He was a magician, and he
Hmm.
used to do tricks when he was working on the railway with the guards, so that they had extra long break periods, and the things that he would make disappear, he always asked for food, and then he was allowed to keep it because the Japanese guards felt it was then contaminated. Um, in a way, it was a very kind of counterintuitive book because I thought it was going to be very grim and depressing, but it wasn't. It was so uplifting because I met men who'd taken exams in camps, who'd learned to paint, famous painters, who'd done a lot of acting, who'd written wonderful poetry. So all those things, and so it was all about that. And it's just been re-released because it's been a while since I wrote it. And do you know? I've forgotten what it's called now. Who do you think you are? The
Yes,
TV
yes, yes.
documentary. Yeah, so I was really lucky to be on that with Will Young again. I don't know if you know him as an actor and a singer. And I got to go to Stalag Luft 3, which is the Great Escape
Mm,
camp. So it was just amazing to actually go to a place that I'd read so much about and seen different versions of.
fantastic. It's really interesting too, that wartime terror and horror, but also daily life that can be, as you say, slightly uplifting. I think the last book I wrote, The Year We Escaped, is set partly in Gurs, which is a French internment camp. It's the
Uh-huh.
same thing. When you're writing for kids, you need something that's not too horrific,
Yeah.
but that's instructive. And the things that you can do with mud. I mean, it becomes clay, and there were these
Yeah.
extraordinary sculptures that were made. So there's all these things that you don't think about, those little slithers of war that make the days bearable, I think.
Yes, and also kind of in a way changed my life because my dad was engaged to someone else when he was in the camp and he got sent what was known as a Dear John letter. She decided that she didn't want to marry him. And when that happened, all the men gathered around and forced the person who got that letter to sit down and write a very positive letter back saying, I'm very happy for you and we wouldn't have been the perfect match. And that's what my dad did. And then when he got home to Britain, he had already kind of met my mum. And that was it, really.
Ah, and there
So,
you are.
yeah, here I am. Yes.
And did your father get a chance to read your book?
No, sadly, he died while I was writing it. But he knew I was writing it, and it was really nice to talk to him about it. And my mum was alive and gave me permission to write about it. So it's a really special book to me for those
Mhm.
reasons.
Let's move on to Atlantic Furies. Now, it's the story of the six women who battled to be the first female to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. In fact, that's the strap line. The Telegraph gave it a five-star review and described it as superb, which is a pretty good recommendation. The Mail said it was compulsive, part Barbie movie and part wacky races. We might come back to that. And it goes on to say, Gillies' great skill lies in giving us a bone-shaking sense of what it must have been like to sit high in the skies, munching on chocolate and trying to screen out the propeller noise. So, I will have to second, third, fourth those reviews. What
Thank you.
particularly, my pleasure, what particularly excited me about this book was that you paint such a vivid picture of being in the air in 1927 in this small, small machine. And I think what really got me was a very early passage in the book, which is not about female pilots, that comes later. In fact, it focuses on the British male pilots, John Alcock and Arthur Whitten Brown. And I'm just wondering, to give everyone the flavour of it, would you mind just reading that very short excerpt?
Of course not.
Thank you.
Their expedition would assume epic proportions over the years, like the tales of Viking voyagers who left their homelands in Scandinavia to follow an uncertain horizon. When, deep into their flight, rain turned to hail and then to snow, they noticed that the engines had lost their regular beat as the snow was blocking the fuel gauges. Brown felt he had no option but to pull off his mittens, stand up, and pick his way through the supports and onto the wing. There was a moment when Alcock tried to stop him, and they had a brief mid-air tussle before Brown, who was still troubled by a wartime leg injury and walked with a stick, continued to across the wing where his feet slipped on the icy surface. Painfully, he extracted a jackknife from his pocket and chipped away at the ice, a few perilous inches away from the propeller. The exhaust roaring in his face, his whole body tensed against the slipstream. He managed to clear the air intakes and make his way with care back to his seat. Brown was said to have repeated this feat 5 times. Alcock's response to a reporter on their arrival about 16 hours after leaving Newfoundland summed up the extreme conditions they'd endured. We did not suffer from cold or exhaustion, except when looking over the side, then the sleet chewed bits out of our faces.
It just, it just gobsmacked me. Um, Tell me, can you paint the picture for us? Because I mean, the research you've done has been very comprehensive. How big was this plane? I mean, what did it have? How would you get over? Is it serious that they're saying mid-air, someone is climbing out of the cockpit onto a wing?
Yeah, so that's what the accounts say, and it's difficult to give a sense of the size of the plane. It's actually in the Science Museum in London, and I was determined to see it, and also to see Jason, which is another plane that's dear to my heart, which was Amy Johnson's plane. And it took me ages to find it because they're suspended from the ceiling, but they're really quite small. So I'd say probably, the area that you're able to sit in is it's just like being in a kind of mini, really. And yes, I'm not sure. I think probably some of it has been inflated slightly in that, the extent to which he did go out on the wing. But yeah, he had to do that because otherwise the engine would have stalled and that would have been it, really. So those earlier planes are so exposed. And when I was doing my book about Amy Johnson, who was the first woman to fly from England to Australia in 1930, my husband bought me a trip up in a biplane. And it was really good research because I remember thinking, I will either want to remortgage the house or I will never want to fly again. And we had to wait for the weather to be absolutely calm and still. And if you think these pilots were flying in really terrible conditions, I went up and it was absolutely terrifying. You feel every bump and movement. You see the light coming up through the fuselage. When I got out, I remember thinking that wing doesn't really look very carefully bolted on. And I had a female pilot with me, which was really exciting. She kept saying, "You have the controls." And I said, "I don't want the controls. Take the controls back." And there'd been some talk of doing a loop the loop.
Yes.
Um,
No.
and I wasn't quite sure that I was properly strapped in. And because I'm British, of course, I thought I don't want to mention that. I don't want to, make a scene. But luckily, we didn't do that. And I remember coming out of that plane and shaking, and my legs wouldn't work properly. It was such a kind of elemental experience because you're so aware of the wind and the light, and it is flying in a way that we don't fly when we go on holiday these days. So it's you can see why all of the pilots felt so strongly about their planes because you have to be they're like a kind of a second skin because if something goes wrong with them then you're completely lost. They're amazing, these pilots, these early pilots, and each of the flights I talk about were kind of trying to learn something from the earlier aviators. So although each one got a bit more sophisticated, it never got comfortable, and because you needed as much fuel as possible, everything was stripped out. So it really was uncomfortable and you were bumped around and the noise was terrible. So flying in a way that I think we can never really recreate today.
And how cold would it be?
Oh, really cold. And so when Amelia Earhart flew the first time, she she borrowed a big kind of heavy coat, and they drank. Well, she didn't because she was very kind of sensible and clean living, but most of them drank thermos flasks of coffee to keep them warm, but also to keep them awake as well because it was such a long flight. So it's kind of a physical assault on you as a person, as much as also, the mental strain of concentration and dealing with fear, and your emotions. And there's a great story that Lindbergh tells, who was the first woman, the first man to cross solo, and he was a very kind of down to earth person. But later he said that when he got halfway across, so there was no turning back, he had a real vision that angels came through the plane. And I think that's really interesting because that it's a bit like, other explorers talk about this as well, this kind of third man, so that someone who's propelling you, sorry for the pun, to keep going when you really might be at a complete low. So there's lots at play here. There's the kind of physical constraint of it, and also the emotional kind of character that you need to keep going when you're completely alone. So flying across an Atlantic, there's no hope if you come down. If you come down anywhere else where there's land, you've got a chance, but not across a huge stretch of water like that.
As a generalization, do you think the pilots that you studied um, denied the fact that they might die and had this idea they're immortal, or they were comfortable with the fact that you could live in the moment and if you were to die, so be it?
No, I think it's a mixture. So quite a few of them had a drink problem, the men particularly, and I think that's because they knew of the risks they were taking. I think that the women that I write about just were completely obsessed and knew they had to do this for lots of different reasons. So one of the women I write about, she was Frances Grayson Wilson. She was very religious, and for her, she was kind of there was a religious element to what she was doing. Other co-pilots did it for the money, but I think they were aware of the risks, and there was so much coverage that it was a constant threat. So there were lots of horrible accidents on takeoff because these planes were loaded with fuel. So people died in horrible ways, and they would have known that. So I think it was just an obsession that they had to do it.
And it's not a cheap obsession either, is it? I mean, how would you fund this? And I'm thinking particularly about the women that you study, because at this time, I'm presuming that the idea of having your own money is still quite novel, or if novel at all.
Yeah.
How
Um,
how did that happen?
So that was one of the things that kind of surprised me when I first started looking into this book. So I was reading a biography of Amelia Earhart, of which there are many, and I it just casually mentioned that she had been financed by a woman, which I thought was really surprising in the 1920s. Amy Phipps Guest, who was a very wealthy American who married a British MP, and she had really wanted to make that flight herself, and her family wouldn't let her. And her son said, "Well, I'm leaving Harvard if you do this." So she found vicarious pleasure in
Mm.
getting another woman to do it. And she chose Amelia Earhart because she kind of symbolized clean living. She was a graduate. She was a qualified pilot, but she wasn't by a long stretch the most experienced pilot at that time. And she had two other co-pilots, although technically she was the leader of the team. She never took control of the plane because she simply didn't have the experience to do that. So there was Amy Phipps financing that. Another flight that I talk about with Frances Grayson, she had made a lot of money in real estate, which again is very unusual, and she was supported by another very wealthy woman who'd inherited money. In the other examples, it's mainly kind of syndicates of businessmen who saw the potential for this, and there were also potentials for sponsorship, newspaper deals, film deals, all of those things if you made it. So it could bring you a lot of money.
There's a number of women that you describe, and there's one who has quite a cameo role, and her name's Bessie Coleman. I was interested in Bessie's story.
Yeah,
Tell me about Bessie.
yeah. Yes, so I'm ashamed to say I hadn't heard of her before I did the book, but she's a pilot of color, and she grew up in a very poor family in Texas, and then moved to Chicago and became a manicurist. And she wanted to learn to fly, but no one in the States would teach a black woman to fly, and so she had to go to France to learn to fly, which in itself is an incredible achievement because it must have been so lonely to go somewhere such a long way away and not speaking French. And she came back to the States, got her license, and was determined to set up a flying school where anyone would be welcome and people of colour could learn to fly. And so she had to raise money for that. So she went around performing in flying circuses. And really sadly, she had a terrible accident and fell out of the plane she was in and was killed. And that's partly because then, as now, planes are designed for men, and she was quite a petite woman, and she was looking over the side, and that's when the accident happened. And her reputation has kind of had a quite a slow burn, but now she's really quite well known. She's been on stamps, the first um, person of colour to be in space, took a photo of Bessie Coleman with her as an inspiration. There's a Bessie Coleman Straße in Frankfurt, and there was a Bessie Coleman day in the States. And academics are now studying her and the way she spoke in a way that Sojourner Truth in the 19th century is remembered as this great advocate for women and what women could do.
You mentioned that her accident was partly caused because of the design of the aeroplanes, and you write
Yeah.
about that in some detail. Reminds me a little bit, although this is a probably slightly superficial example. You know, when you go out for a dinner, like a work conference, and you've got to wear black tie, and so you know you wear a little dress if you're a woman, and you wear a black tie suit if you're a bloke, and the air conditioning is always really, really cold. Freeze.
Yeah, yes.
Seems to me that the planes are the planes that you're talking about were a bit like that. How were they designed for men, and in what way did that make it difficult for women?
Well, it was simply that, the average man tends to be taller than the average woman. And so you kind of read accounts of these women pilots, and they had to take a cushion with them to have that slight elevation so they could see properly. And there's a wonderful picture of Elsie Mackay, who's a British pilot I wrote about, who was Lord Inchcape's daughter, so quite a socialite, and she was quite petite. And I love this photo, but she's kind of stretching over the propeller. And if you look carefully, she's wearing shoes with quite high heels. And I think that's partly because she was very stylish, but also those few extra inches really helped her to be able to reach bits of the aeroplane, which she wouldn't otherwise have been able to. Um, and the press of the day were absolutely fascinated with, and I have a whole chapter on hairdos in my book
Oh.
because it seems impossible to mention Amelia Earhart without saying tousled-haired Amelia Earhart. And Ruth Elder, another brilliant pilot who made it as far as the Azores, was very glamorous, and she wore her hair in a ribbon, and that became her trademark. And Ruth's ribbon was a fashion item that lots of young women really took to and copied her style. So, and there were all sorts of crazy things about, what women could or couldn't do. And there was a doctor who reported in a journal that instructors should make sure that women didn't fly before, during, or after their period, which doesn't leave an awful lot of time to get into the chair, does it? And even female pilots saying, "Oh, don't put a mirror in the plane because that'll distract the woman pilot because she'll want to adjust her makeup." So there was a huge lot of prejudice, even though women were going out and doing these incredible things, and also doing things like swimming the Channel, the English Channel, and becoming brilliant tennis players.
Which made the need to push and the tenacity needed by your pilots all the greater. There's a number of them. If you mentioned a few of us to a few of them to us, who was your favourite out of everyone?
Well, I get asked that a lot, and it
You found
changes a lot. I
ah,
think I think at the moment it's Elsie Mackay because she was, well, kind of she partly was Scottish, and I'm half Scottish, and she just sounds like an amazing woman. So her father, as I said, Lord Inchcape, he had come up the ranks and made a lot of money working for P&O. She did so many things. So she was an actor. She eloped with her boyfriend in the First World War. So she'd met him while she was nursing, and he was Catholic, South African, and an actor, which were exactly the things her dad didn't want to have in a husband. So they eloped to Scotland. Then that didn't work out, so she annulled the marriage, kind of calmed down a bit. and then did things like designed the interiors of her dad's ocean liners. She was a really good horsewoman and she did all her own stunts in films. And she was a brilliant pilot. And she was determined to try and fly from Britain to Australia, to America, which is the hardest way to try and cross the Atlantic. And sadly, their plane went missing, and yeah, it's a great story that involves seances and all sorts of things. So I have a real soft spot for her, but I admire each of the six women I looked at in different ways, and half of them were never seen again. So there's quite a bit of kind of tragedy in the stories.
Just had a question for you about the grief experience by
Yeah.
the partners in your book. Before I ask that though, we're just heading towards the end. So if anyone had some questions that they'd like to ask Midge, if you could just pop it in the chat room, and we'll have some time to ask Midge. There's an expression I hadn't heard of before that you use in your book, which is called ambiguous loss. What is
Mm.
ambiguous loss?
Yes, so it's a term I came across, and it was coined, I think, in the 1980s or 70s. And it's about people who lose someone and they don't know what happens to them. So it might be someone who disappears in a plane crash or just walks out the door and never comes back, or in wartime, the body is never found. And it's how does the family or the loved ones deal with that? Because you know you've lost someone, but it's ambiguous because you don't know, you don't have closure what happens to them. And that seemed to be a particularly painful part of the people around these pilots. So the pilots always are in the headlines, but many of them, the co-pilots, the male co-pilots, had widows and families, and it's really sad the way that like Lord Inchcape might hear a story that a bottle had washed up with what's said to be a letter from his daughter in it. So you kind of think you've come to terms with grief, and then it all erupts again because something triggers it again. So I was really interested in that, and how, in a way, that we still have ambiguous loss because planes still go missing and people still go missing. And I think that must be such a painful thing to deal with.
Yes, I found that very interesting. It struck me too that uh, ambiguous loss is something that is not only part of this book, but I'm assuming as well part of the experience of prisoners of war, um,
Yeah.
and the experience of other aviators like Amy Johnson, just given the cohort that she's around. So is this?
Yes. Well, I hadn't really thought about it before, but yes. So Emmy Johnson, like Amelia Earhart, their bodies were never found, so we don't know what happened to them, and all sorts of rumors and sometimes quite outlandish theories have been suggested about how they came to their end. And with soldiers in the First and Second World War, I think it was particularly difficult because also, people at the time were much more religious and needed a body and a grave to mourn. And once you have industrial killing, you can't always have that body. So I find it very fascinating to think, how do you remember people, and what happens when you don't have a kind of focus, a grave to go to mourn, and how do we think about people in different ways?
I'm going to move now to back a bit closer to home. You're part of an artistic family. So your husband is Jim Kelly, who's an award-winning crime writer, and your daughter Rosa is an artist. Is that a recipe for success, having three artists together?
Um, so my daughter's 26, and when she's growing up, she said she might make up stories, but she would never do anything like I did because I spent so long, locked away in my book read in
Mm.
my room reading books, and I can't draw at all. So she does graphic novels, and I really admire anyone who can do that. Jim, my husband, writes fiction, crime fiction, and I think it would be difficult if we were doing similar things. But actually, he's really interested in history, and he sets a lot of his books in the Second World War. So there is some overlap, and it's funny. He'll sometimes come in and tell me he's got stuck and tell me what the problem is. I will say nothing, and then he'll say, "That was so helpful, thank you." So I think just being able to voice, that you're stuck with something, and to live with someone who knows what it's like to have all those ups and downs of writing, and to have moments when you think, "Is it really worth doing this?" And those moments of despair. So I think it's good to live with someone who fully understands that.
And once Thursday Book Club have all read Atlantic Furies, which of your husband's book would you suggest we start with?
Oh gosh. Well, he's got a standalone which we were just discussing called The Silent Child, which made me cry. He has a series that's set in Cambridge, wartime Cambridge. You need to start with the first one of those, and I can't remember what it's called, because we're always working one ahead. Because they're called things like the next one to come out is The American Suspect, I think, or is it The American Siren, The Mathematical Bridge? Anyway, you just Google him really, and but they are good fun.
And that's another example of living with a writer too, because I imagine that the titles that you know the books as are not necessarily the titles that become published. So,
Yes, exactly. And also, he's normally talking about the book he's writing now, and then he will be giving a talk about the book that's just come out. So I'm completely confused about. I just know we're in the Second World War, and I'm happy to be there. So
three recommendations. We always ask our guests for three book
yeah.
recommendations. Do you have something for us?
Yes, I do. So my first one is West with the Night by Beryl Markham. So she was the first person to fly the Atlantic solo from east to west, but she's a really interesting woman in lots of ways. She was part of the kind of Kenya White Mischief set. She was a racehorse trainer, and this book is beautiful. It's got wonderful descriptions of Kenya and flying over the Atlantic, and the quote on the back is from Ernest Hemingway. It says, "She can write rings around all of us." It really is a wonderful book. I mean, imagine having a quote like that on your.
So good. And it's on the back. You'd think you'd put it in the
Yeah,
front.
yeah, she would, yes. um, and then on holiday this year, I read Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I think I may have read when I was a teenager, but it was so wonderful to read it again. And it's so beautifully gothic and very modern in lots of ways, the kind of psychology of the people in it. And I just love that. And I'm looking forward this Christmas to watching the original black and white movie of that. So I thought that was amazing. And then my I read that one as an ebook, so I can't wave that at you. My third recommendation is by Sarah Waters, and it's The Little Stranger. Sarah Waters does lots of really brilliant historical novels. She's a British writer, and this is, well, is it a ghost story or is it not a ghost story? It's set after the Second World War, and it's really about class. It's about someone who, as a little boy, his mother had been a servant in the big house, and now he's grown up and he's a doctor. And it's all about shifting classes, but
Mm.
it's also probably a ghost story, but you never quite know. And when I was reading it, I was reading in bed and my husband came home and he said, "Your pupils are so dilated. What is going on?" And I was just terrified. So I was like a good ghost story over Christmas. So I think I'd like to recommend that as the third choice.
Oh, thank you so much. We're just about out of time. We've got a minute. Does anyone have a burning question that they haven't yet managed to put in the chats? Otherwise, if it's an urgent question, I'm sure I can email it to Midge and I can give the answer. Midge, it's been delightful to have you. Thank you for coming to us from the other side of the world without having to get into a plane, unlike your adventurers. And we wish you the best of luck with the rest of the tour and your writing.
Thank you. It's been so nice to meet you all. And yeah, I hope I get to Australia one day and have a lovely holiday season when it comes. And it's good we haven't mentioned the cricket.
Yes, yes, it is good we haven't mentioned it, but next time,
Thank you.
it's always next time.
Well,
See you. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. See you next week.
bye.